My name is Rabbi Samuel Levin, and on December 3, 2013, my life changed forever. 4 years, I was a devoted Orthodox rabbi, leading a thriving congregation in Manhattan, New York. My entire world revolved around the Torah, Jewish law, and the traditions passed down through generations. I prided myself on my deep knowledge of Scripture, often debating complex theological questions with scholars and students alike. Yet, despite my confidence, there were certain passages that always unsettled me. Isaiah 53, Zechariah's prophecy of the pierced one, and Daniel's timeline of the Messiah. I had spent decades crafting arguments to explain them away, convincing both myself and others that they had nothing to do with Jesus. But no matter how many times I read them, something inside me felt unresolved. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and I had just finished reviewing notes for my upcoming Shabbat sermon. My wife, Miriam, had already gone to bed, and the house was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. I was about to turn in for the night when I noticed that our toaster had gotten wet from a spill at dinner. Not wanting to leave it in that state, I decided to fix it. I unplugged it, wiped it down, and tilted it slightly to check inside. It should have been a simple task, something I had done countless times before. But this time, the moment my hand brushed against the interior, an intense jolt of electricity shot through my body. Everything went black. I expected to wake up in my kitchen, dazed and in pain. But instead, I found myself in a place that words can barely describe. It wasn't just darkness, it was a void, a complete absence of life, warmth, or hope. The air was heavy, pressing against me like an unseen force. Then I heard them. Voices. Not shouting, not screaming in agony, but weeping, a sound so filled with regret and sorrow that it pierced me deeper than any physical pain ever could. As my vision adjusted, I saw faces emerging from the walls, frozen in expressions of torment. Men I had known. Respected scholars, brilliant teachers, rabbis whose books I had studied for years. Their eyes, once filled with wisdom, now radiated only sorrow. Then, among them, I saw Rabbi Eliezer Roth, my mentor, the man who had guided me through yeshiva. He looked straight at me, and in a voice filled with unbearable grief he said, "Samuel, we were wrong. All of us. The signs were there, but we refused to see." Before I could even process his words, another voice joined him. "We made the law our idol. We missed the very Messiah we were waiting for." My heart pounded. I wanted to argue, to tell them they were mistaken, that they had misunderstood the Scriptures. But deep down, a terrifying thought began to take root. What if they were right? Panic surged through me as I took a step back, my mind racing for an explanation. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a trick of my unconscious mind. But the pain in their voices, the sheer hopelessness in their eyes, told me otherwise. These were not just lost souls. They were men who had dedicated their entire lives to studying Scripture, to guiding our people in faith. And yet, here they were, trapped in this abyss, warning me of a truth I had spent my whole life rejecting. Then the darkness around me began to shift. A heavy presence filled the space, and the air became thick with something I can only describe as dread. I felt an unseen force pressing in on me, as if the very weight of my past arguments, my sermons, my certainty in my own knowledge was crushing me. The voices grew louder, their words echoing through the void. The prophecies were clear. The signs were given. We ignored them. I covered my ears, shaking my head. No, this wasn't true. It couldn't be. Then the darkness moved. The very walls around me shifted and breathed, and I realized with horror that I was not alone. Shadowy figures lurked beyond what my eyes could fully comprehend, their presence radiating an overwhelming sense of regret, of knowledge gained too late. I tried to speak, to cry out, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Then a single light appeared in the distance, small at first like a distant star, but growing steadily, piercing through the darkness. And as it grew, something incredible happened. The moment that light touched the shadows, they recoiled in fear. The oppressive weight that had been crushing me began to lift, and for the first time since arriving in this place I could breathe. The faces in the walls turned toward the light, some with longing, some with terror. I wanted to move toward it, but I was frozen, trapped between two realities, the weight of my past beliefs and the undeniable presence of something greater before me. Then, from within the light, a figure stepped forward. The figure emerged slowly, but the closer he came, the more powerful his presence became. I couldn't make out his features at first. The light surrounding him was too intense, too overwhelming, but I could feel him. A presence unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was not just powerful, it was holy, filled with an authority that made every fiber of my being tremble. And yet, despite the sheer intensity of his presence, there was something else. A love so deep, so consuming, that it pierced straight through me, exposing every hidden part of my soul. I fell to my knees. I couldn't stand in his presence. I didn't need to be told who he was. I knew. Every part of me recognized the truth, even if my mind fought against it. This was the one I had spent my life arguing against. The one I had dismissed. The one I had warned others to stay away from. And now, in the place where truth could no longer be ignored, I was face to face with him. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't like the voices of the rabbis in the walls, filled with regret and sorrow. His voice was filled with power, yet carried an unfathomable gentleness. It didn't just ring in my ears, it resonated within my very soul. Samuel, my son. The moment he said my name, I broke. It wasn't just a greeting, it was recognition. He knew me. Not just the rabbi, the scholar, the teacher, he knew me truly deeply. Every thought I had ever had, every doubt, every moment of pride, every word I had spoken against him, he knew it all. And yet, standing before me, there was no anger, no condemnation, only love and truth. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile what was happening, trying to hold on to the foundation I had built my entire life upon. But then he asked me a single question. Why have you rejected me? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mind scrambled for an answer. Something, anything to justify a lifetime of denial. I had spent years debating, crafting arguments, defending my beliefs. And yet, in that moment, standing before him, every argument felt empty. Every explanation felt hollow. I had nothing. I wanted to say, because I was following the Torah. I wanted to say, because I was protecting my people. I wanted to say, because I truly believed I was right. But deep down I knew the truth. I had never truly sought him. I had only sought to defend what I already believed. I had ignored the questions that gnawed at me, dismissed the passages that pointed too clearly in his direction, silenced the doubts that had whispered in the back of my mind for years. I had chosen blindness. Tears filled my eyes as I looked up at him, struggling to speak. I didn't know, I finally whispered. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my own words. Because the truth was, I had known. The scriptures had been there all along. Isaiah 53, Zechariah's prophecy, Daniel's timeline, they had all pointed to him. And yet I had looked away. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply looked at me. Not with anger. Not with disappointment. But with sorrow. A deep, aching sorrow, not for himself but for me. You studied the scriptures, he said gently, but you did not see me in them. His words hit me like a wave, and suddenly, scripture after scripture flooded my mind. Genesis 3 verse 15, the seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head. The Passover lamb. Psalm 22, the suffering, the pierced hands and feet. Daniel's prophecy of the Messiah being cut off. They all fit. They always had. But I had been so determined to defend my own understanding, so afraid of what it would mean if I was wrong, that I had refused to see what had been in front of me all along. I trembled as realization crashed over me. I had spent my life waiting for the Messiah. And now here he was, Jesus, Yeshua, the very one I had denied. And then he lifted his hands. As his hands rose, I saw them. The marks. Deep wounds, scars that should not have been there but were. Right through his wrists. Pierced. Just as the prophet Zechariah had written, "They shall look upon me whom they have pierced." I gasped. My body shook as I stared at the undeniable truth before me. These were not just scars. They were proof. They were the fulfillment of the prophecies I had spent my entire life explaining away. They were the cost of my denial. Tears streamed down my face. I wanted to look away. The weight of my own rejection was unbearable. How many times had I read Isaiah's words? He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. How many times had I dismissed it? Convinced myself it was metaphorical? How had I missed this? I had no words, no excuses left, only grief. He lowered his hands, but the marks were burned into my soul. I had spent my whole life waiting for a Messiah who had already come. And now, standing before him, I finally saw. I fell forward, sobbing uncontrollably. I had been so blind, so arrogant, and yet he was still here, still standing before me, still calling my name. Oh, what? After everything I had said, after all the times I had dismissed him, argued against him, why was he still looking at me with love? Then, in the softest yet most powerful voice I have ever heard, he spoke again. "It is not too late." My breath caught in my throat. Could it be? Could I, after everything, still be forgiven? I had rejected him, fought against him, led others away from him. And yet, he was offering me grace. I shook my head. I don't deserve it. He knelt beside me. "No one does," he said. "That is why I came." At his words, something inside me broke. The weight of my entire life, the pride, the denial, the years spent fighting against him, came crashing down all at once. I couldn't stop crying. For the first time, I saw myself clearly, not as a teacher, not as a scholar, not as a leader, but as a sinner. And yet, in that moment of absolute brokenness, something else filled me, hope. "But I rejected you," I whispered. "I led others away from you." He nodded, his eyes filled with an understanding I couldn't comprehend. Yes. I braced myself, expecting him to turn away, to leave me in the darkness I had chosen. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out his hand. "But I have never rejected you." At those words, I felt something break inside me again. This time, not from pain, but from something deeper. Relief. "You were blind," he continued, "but now you see. And now you must choose." His hand remained outstretched, waiting. Not forcing. Not demanding. Just waiting. For the first time in my life, I had no defense, no argument left to hold on to. Only the truth. Jesus was the Messiah. He had always been. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay in the darkness any longer. With shaking hands, I reached out. The second my fingers touched his, everything changed. A flood of warmth, of life, surged through me. The darkness around us shattered like glass, breaking apart in a burst of brilliant light. The sorrow, the despair, the weight of the lost souls faded into the distance. The only thing left was him. And the truth. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I woke up gasping for air, my wife's hands clutching mine, paramedics surrounding me. I had been dead for 14 minutes and 27 seconds. But I wasn't the same man who had died. The rabbi who had gone into the darkness was gone, and in his place was someone who had seen the truth. To anyone watching this, I need you to understand, I never believed this was possible. I fought against this truth my entire life. But I am telling you now, with every fiber of my being, Jesus is the Messiah. I know many of you will doubt this. Some will be angry just as I once was. But please, I beg you, look for yourself. Read Isaiah 53. Read Daniel's prophecy. Read Psalm 22. Ask yourself why our people have been taught to ignore them. Time is short. I was given a second chance. But not everyone will be. Do not wait until it is too late. If this testimony has spoken to you, please share it. Someone out there needs to hear this. And if you are searching, if you are questioning, call out to him. He is waiting. Because I am living proof, no one is too far gone.